The strongest sorcerer of the Heian era, Ryomen Sukuna, has been called many things. The strongest sorcerer of all time, a living natural disaster, the king of the curses. This king of curses has been able to rule over the world of JJK for more than a millennia, dominating with his unrivaled power. Much like Sukuna, the tailed beasts in Naruto have been described as natural disasters and the strongest forces on the planet. So, naturally, there have been several videos on this platform and others comparing the so-called demons. But this makes me wonder, what would happen if Sukuna was in the position of the tailed beasts? What if the Akatsuki had to hunt down the strongest sorcerer instead of the chakra monsters? In other words, today we'll be exploring and breaking down what would happen if the Akatsuki attempted capturing Sukuna. But before we get too far into this video, if you enjoy anime content and want to tune in for new content each week, both long form and short, feel free to subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss out when new content drops. Thank you in advance, I love you all, but without any further ado, let's jump into the video. So, Sukuna versus the Akatsuki. Like I said, this has already been done in a variety of ways, including by TG, who just dropped a Sukuna versus the Akatsuki 1v1s video that I'll put a link to in the description. Make sure to go show him some love if you have not already. But I don't think this topic has ever been done in this specific context. Essentially, the structure here is going to be us taking Sukuna and pitting him against each Akatsuki duo, with them attempting to not kill, but capture him, as if he were a tailed beast. Also, for the sake of making the power scaling work as well as it can, we'll be equalizing the power systems here, meaning chakra equals cursed energy. This will allow for our combatants to interact with one another in a meaningful way, and eliminate any silly, well, X character doesn't possess Y power, so they can't even resist Z attack. Yeah, none of that nonsense. I'd also like to add that in order to do Sukuna's scaling, there will be some very minor spoilers, but I'll warn you ahead of time, give you a timestamp to skip to, and do my best to avoid any main plot points being spoiled. That being said, how strong is the king of the curses? I do want to keep this scaling and abilities section brief for the sake of brevity, so I'll be covering the basics right now and delve into more detail later when necessary. It is worth noting that the version of Sukuna that we'll be using is full power pre-transformation. For anime-only fans, all you need to know is it's basically the full power Sukuna that you would think of. Think, what is full power Sukuna? Yes, if you've already feel like you have a good grasp on the abilities and scaling of Sukuna, feel free to skip ahead to any of the matchups listed in the chapters for the video, as I will have them marked in the description. So, in terms of Sukuna's speed scaling, it is pretty contentious, with low-end and high-end interpretations, neither of which really having a dominant hold on the scaling community as of yet. On the low end, Sukuna is a lightning timer, and on the high end, he's between 99% and 4 times the speed of light. In order to understand why, you do have to dive into some minor manga spoilers, so for anime fans only who don't want to be spoiled, feel free to skip ahead to this timestamp to avoid that. Basically, this scaling comes from his bout with Kashimo. The reason this is such a wide range is because there are multiple interpretations of how Kashimo's abilities work. Essentially, Kashimo is able to use electricity-based attacks to do a variety of things, such as amp his physicals. But where the scaling implications come from are from his use of electricity-based projectiles. On one hand, Panda outright says that this ability acts like lightning, meaning that we can confidently get it to lightning speed, making Sukuna a lightning timer for being able to react to and aim dodge said projectile. On the other hand, his attacks are described by the narrator as the manipulation of electromagnetic waves, which move at 99.999 etc% the speed of light in Earth's atmosphere. This would get him physically to that 99%, or for some people, the scaling they've done gets them all the way up to 4 times the speed of light. So, it really depends on your interpretation. I personally am on the relativistic to FTL JJK wave based on how the attacks are described, so that's what we'll be going with here, leaning more into the direction of relativistic speeds. Sukuna's durability and attack potency are a bit less contentious, but still have a wide range as well. Some people scale him all the way up to large planetary, and some have him at city block level. Again, in order to get a feel for why, there are some minor spoilers that will need to be used, so anime onlys, feel free to skip ahead to this timestamp to avoid that. Because of the way that Gege writes, feats aren't really prioritized over just a well-written fight, so sometimes it's difficult to gauge just how powerful somebody is, and in some cases, we have to use some upscaling. That brings us to Dagon. Now, Dagon is a special grade cursed spirit that is far weaker than Sukuna, and Dagon was able to manifest a full tropical island as its domain. Since we know that domains are a manifestation of the soul, and the soul and body are contiguous, we can safely scale the soul to the body. Now, this means that Dagon's real-world durability and AP should be island level plus. Because Toji Zenin was able to kill Dagon, and a teenage Gojo was able to kill Toji, while Sukuna was able to contend with and even kill a stronger adult Gojo, tanking several attacks from him in the process, it's safe to say that Sukuna scales massively above Dagon. Now, some people use Sukuna tanking, air quotes, the hollow purple explosion as a raw durability feat, but it's really disingenuous to do that. Let me explain why. It's incredibly likely that Sukuna used domain amplification to neutralize the hollow purple technique to some degree. There are a few different reasons for this. The first time Gojo uses hollow purple from 4 kilometers away, we see Sukuna reaching his arms out to sort of catch it, which results in his arm being blown off. Then later on in the fight, when Gojo uses hollow purple 200%, we see he lost his arm again, plus took significant damage over the rest of his body. Because he's constantly using domain amplification throughout the fight in order to be able to tag Gojo and negate damage from blue, we can safely assume that he was also using it there in order to take on the explosion from hollow purple. This idea is reinforced by the fact that Sukuna thinks to himself that even just a 100% hollow purple, not the 120% hollow purple that he originally fired, would be fatal if it lands. So what I'm getting at here is that A, his domain amplification can massively amp his durability by neutralizing attacks to a degree before they actually hit his physical body, and B, this isn't a raw durability feat because the domain amplification is an unquantifiable amp to his durability. Or I guess it would be more accurate to say that the domain amplification takes some heat off of the attacks, making it easier for his physical body to tank them. This is also a solid counter to the Sukuna tanking hollow purple disproves existence erasure claim, because we know that it was partially neutralized before it hit, so you could argue that it neutralizes the existence erasure effect, but that's a whole different video, all in of itself. That said, because of the upscaling from Dagon, on the low end I think it's safe to assume that Sukuna is mountain level plus, and on the high end we can get him to large planetary. Because special grade cursed spirits are stated to be able to wipe out entire countries, and Sukuna is way stronger than any of them, Sukuna should be massively above all of those special grade cursed spirits. So I lean in the direction of planetary, maybe not quite planetary, but getting up there in both AP and durability, with his actual destructive capacity being about mountain level plus, with a range of 200 meters in his domain expansion. Speaking of which, let's move on to his abilities. Sukuna does have a wide arsenal of abilities, but they're all pretty straightforward, and as they become more important, I'll cover them, but essentially, he has 6 basic abilities that'll be important to know. His domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine, his cursed techniques, Dismantle and Cleave, domain amplification, Reverse Curse technique, and the 10 Shadows technique. He's also got some projectile attacks that will be important later, but they're not really worth covering at this point in time. In the most basic terms possible, Dismantle and Cleave are slashing techniques that are used to cut targets selected by Sukuna, both animate and inanimate. I'll go into more detail later, but that's basically it. Malevolent Shrine is Sukuna's domain expansion that essentially takes Dismantle and Cleave and gives them a sure hit that instantly appears on the opponent, effectively ignoring speed. The range is, like I said before, 200 meters, and while it's technically escapable, if you can't reinforce your durability or open your own domain, you are pretty much done. Domain amplification is the ability to cover oneself in their domain, essentially, allowing for them to nullify any cursed techniques that come in contact with them them to a certain degree. Just like domains cancel out curse techniques, this does, but to a lesser degree, to where you're able to still take some damage, but it does take a significant amount of heat off of the cursed abilities. RCT, or Reversed Curse Technique, is the positive application of cursed energy, allowing for quick regeneration. I mean, that's basically it. Now, Sukuna is really good with this, able to regenerate whole limbs in a short amount of time, and even use RCT to repair his burnt-out techniques, but that's it. It's basically just regeneration. And finally, the 10 Shadows technique, which Broken Ronin has a fantastic video on. I will have that in my description as well. If you want to know more about the 10 Shadows techniques and the in and outs of all the different summons and stuff you get with it, go check that out. But he has this, and it gives him access to the Zenin clan's summonable Shikigami, including Maharaga, the cursed spirit capable of adapting to anything. So I know that was a lot, but it was important, so I hope that you guys absorbed all of that, and I hope you're looking forward to these matchups, because without any further ado, let's jump into our first one. The first Akatsuki duo facing off against the Dishonored One is the Immortal duo, Hidan and Kakuzu. Now, I've got to be real here, Sukuna dog walks these two with next to zero difficulty. While both of these combatants should be able to survive his curse technique's basic applications, neither of them can do anything about his domain expansion or even his raw physical durabilities. He should be faster than both of them by a good amount and physically be able to just beat them down. While it might take a while for Sukuna to put down Kakuzu due to his multiple hearts, I'm fairly certain he'd be able to take these two down without even using his curse technique. So Sukuna survives this and goes on uncaptured with 1 out of 10 difficulty. Next up, Sukuna finds himself squaring off against the artistic duo, Sasori and Hidan. Now, these two are pretty interesting because of their ability to fly, which gives them the aerial advantage. Kind of. This is from a fight that hasn't made the anime yet, but it's not really a spoiler. We can actually see Sukuna kind of jumping on air, giving him a Mario-esque double jump ability that effectively allows him to run on air. So any aerial advantage the artistic duo may have is essentially eliminated by that alone. But with Deidara dropping bombs on him and Sasori sending 100 puppets his way, it won't be as simple as just jumping up there at them and taking them down. He's going to have a bunch of pesky things to deal with before he's able to get to them. This, though, is where some of his abilities that we haven't talked about yet come into play. Sukuna has a couple of ultra-powerful projectiles in his arsenal that I think would really come in handy in a fight where Deidara and Sasori try to play the range game, his flame arrow and his piercing blood. Now, I do think it's more likely that he uses the flame arrow since it's overall more destructive and covers more area with its devastating blast of power, but piercing blood could be really useful to snake through the 100 puppets swarming him from all sides. If he does use the flaming arrow though, I think it should one-tap either of these two. So, even outside of using Dismantle and Cleave, the King of Curses has a viable win condition against both Sasori and Deidara with just the Flame Arrow. But what about the duo? Do they have a feasible win condition against the Calamity that is Ryomen Sukuna? Weirdly, yes, there are 2 possible win cons in a straight-up to-the-death fight, and neither of them come from Sasori. Let's just get this out of the way. Sukuna is stated to be immune to all toxins, so Sasori's poison will not work. His puppets and the Iron Sand are both likely too slow, and the weapons he launches from the Hiruko puppet and his main body just don't pack enough punch to do any real damage considering Sukuna's RCT. So, what are these win cons that I was talking about? I believe the only 2 things that could work are Deidara's C4 and C0. Sukuna does breathe, so C4 would get in his system, and I don't think his RCT is strong or fast enough to counter it, and C0 is more iffy because if he reinforces body with domain amplification, he might be able to nullify it enough to survive, but it is possible that even if it is sort of nullified, he might still die. But here's the problem. Deidara only uses C4 and C0 at the end of his battle with Sasuke when 1, 2, and 3 were already used and countered, so I personally don't even think the fight gets far enough for him to use his only 2 win conditions. And, I mean, let's be real. Sukuna likely one-taps the Hiriko puppet and Sasori's main body in one shot with the flame arrow, which he uses in canon before ever even using his curse techniques. Once Sasori is out of the way, very quickly I might add, C1, C2, and C3 will have to come out before Deidara resorts to C4, and do we really think that Sukuna won't A, get a flame arrow to land before that, B, bisect Deidara with cleave before that, or C, eliminate him with malevolent shrine before that as well? Also, if Deidara is trying to capture Sukuna, I don't think he would even resort to C4 or C0 because they would kill him. Even if he does just say screw it and launch everything he has, again, I think Sukuna's possible win conditions just come earlier in the battle than Deidara's do, and that's not even considering the fact that he should just be able to blitz and one-tap Deidara with his physical abilities alone. I mean, come on, let's be real. Deidara got blitzed by Heavy Sasuke, and would have died if he wouldn't have went after Toby instead. While Heavy Sasuke does have great speed, it's not faster than the higher-end interpretations of Sukuna's, and Sukuna would just grab him and thrash him. So, yeah, at the end of the day, either Sukuna takes out Sasori first and then ends Deidara with one of his one-shot techniques, or he just straight-up physically bullies both of them off rip. Either way, I think the Dishonored One wins 2 to 4 out of 10 difficulty. Our next duo is super interesting, and I think that they will present some really, let's call them unique obstacles for Sukuna, because the matchup we have here is the living natural disaster Ryomen Sukuna versus the Akatsuki's monster duo Itachi and Kisame. This would be a crazy battle to watch. The speed scaling between Itachi and Sukuna should be similar, with Itachi scaling around KCM1 Naruto, who is relativistic to FTL, and Sukuna's clearly higher physical strength and durability is negated by Itachi Susanoo and Kisame's insane durability and regeneration. Domain amplification, which might be able to be used to counter Amaterasu, or at least nullify it enough to keep it from being a lethal hit by using domain amplification and severing what other limb gets hit by it. Sukuna is a great sensor. It's not shinobi, but, you know, whatever. He's really good at sensing cursed energy, so I see no reason why he wouldn't be able to sense Amaterasu and block it with his arm and use domain amplification, but whatever. But even with that, the amplification can likely be absorbed by Samehada. So I think even though he has a counter for one of their abilities with it, they have a counter for that as well. I think everything Kisame has in his arsenal as far as his water-based attacks, they kind of get countered by Dismantle and Cleave. I mean, the thousands of sharks just get countered by thousands of cuts in Malevolent Shrine, so that would be a big issue for both Itachi and Kisame to deal with as well. However, if you argue that the Susanoo would function like a better form of domain amplification, and Kisame might literally be able to absorb parts of the domain because, you know, it's made of cursed energy, it kind of gets pretty weird. So, if Amaterasu is countered, and Malevolent Shrine is potentially countered, and Domain Amplification has counters, but also counters some of their moves, and physicals are kind of a wash, what does this come down to? Well, if you said Genjutsu, you are correct. Now, I have a short and an entire section in my Gojo versus every Naruto villain video on why Gojo should be immune to Genjutsu, because his Infinity is always passive and should stop the chakra, and even if it doesn't, he has passive RCT on his brain at all times, so that should stop it as well. But Sukuna doesn't have either of those, so he should be able to get hit with Genjutsu, which means it's GG, right? Well, not so fast. Now, for anime-only fans, I'm not going to spoil what happens. For manga fans, you're going to know what I'm talking about here. But essentially, there is a point in time where Sukuna does get stunned in a Genjutsu-like manner, and then Mahoraga comes to his aid, automatically saving him and allowing for him to recover. So, I think that is what would happen if Itachi put him under Genjutsu. And because RCT can and does refresh his brain, I do think that if Mahoraga gives him enough time, he should be able to recover from the effects of the Genjutsu. But if Mahoraga jumps in and tries to stop Itachi, I do think he probably gets hit with an Amaterasu or maybe even a Genjutsu himself. But because Mahoraga can adapt to anything, I do believe it might quickly be able to adapt to Genjutsu. I think it's pretty likely, and potentially Amaterasu. Now, because Amaterasu continues to burn, maybe not, but the fact that he was able to adapt to the concept of cutting, I think maybe he could adapt to the concept of burning and just completely neg Amaterasu as well. But do I think that Mahoraga will be able to give Sukuna enough time to recover? Well, anime-only fans, just trust me on this. Yes, I do think Mahoraga would be able to give him enough time to recover from even a Tsukiyomi with his RCT. But this is where Itachi's other, I think, more reliable win condition comes into play. The Totsuka Blade. Now, while Sukuna is stunned, it's entirely possible that both Mahoraga and Sukuna get shish kebabbed with the Totsuka Blade, sealing them both away. I will say that because Sukuna has control over his soul, to the point where Mahito's idol transfiguration doesn't even work on him, you can make an argument that he could resist the Totsuka Blade, but it feels like a stretch, so I'd say it should work. However, remember that Itachi and Kisame are trying to capture Sukuna, not kill him. So, because I'm not sure if Itachi is able to actually retrieve him from the Totsuka Blade's gourd, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he doesn't use it on him. It is likely that the way Mahoraga is taken off the board is through the Totsuka Blade, though, so we'll say he uses it on Mahoraga, but maybe not on Sukuna. Now, if you are of the opinion that he can retrieve those who he has sealed in the Totsuka Blade's gourd, and later on, use them or get them out of there, then cool, we'll go with it, but as of right now, we'll just assume that he can't do that. So if he cannot retrieve those who he has sealed in the Totsuka Blade's gourd, then what do we have? This is a matchup where basically every ability on both sides can be countered by the other side under the right circumstances. Dismantle and Cleave should be countered by the Susanoo and Regen. The Fire Arrow and Piercing Blood are blocked by the Susanoo. Amaterasu is potentially countered by the combination of Domain Amplification and RCT. Genjutsu is countered by Mahoraga coming to Sukuna's defense. But, like I said, that would probably only work once, because Mahoraga then gets sealed away instantly. So, by my estimation, this fight ends one of three ways. Number one, Genjutsu the second time around after Mahoraga has been sealed. Number two, the Totsuka Blade seals him and Itachi is able to actually spit him back out of the gourd, I guess, and then they seal him away. Or number three, Sukuna's one and only win condition, in my opinion, his Space Slash. For anime-only fans, I am about to put massive spoilers on the screen, but all you need to know is that Sukuna eventually shows the ability to target space itself with Dismantle, effectively allowing for him to ignore durability and defense by severing the space he's targeting and everything that resides within it. Skip to this timestamp to avoid spoilers. So, yeah, during his fight with Gojo, Sukuna was able to use Mahoraga's adaptation ability to develop a technique that could cut space itself, severing my glorious king in half. I do think that the Honored One will return, and I have a whole video on it you can check out by clicking the card in the top right, or I'll just have it in the description. But yeah, this move is absolutely busted. Okay, now that the anime-only fans are back, what it boils down to is this. Sukuna's Space Slash is his only real win condition, in my opinion, unless you think his sure hit from his domain lands and kills Itachi before he can activate his Susanoo. And Itachi's guaranteed win condition is a second Genjutsu after Mahoraga is taken out, or potentially, if he can spit them back out, his Totsuka Blade. So, I'll be honest with you, at the end of the day, this is going to come down to your interpretation of the Yata Mirror. If you ascribe to the idea that the Yata Mirror can block Kamui due to the data book saying that it renders all attacks meaningless, then you should think that it counters the Space Slash, because, spatial manipulation and warping wouldn't work against it in your opinion. But if you think that the Yata Mirror wouldn't be able to block Kamui because it's attacking space itself, bypassing defense, then you should believe that it wouldn't block the Space Slash, leaving Sukuna with his valid win condition. Here's the problem though. Even with that, I believe that Itachi is much more likely to use his Genjutsu twice before Sukuna even thinks about using this attack. It's in character for Itachi to spam his Sharingan techniques, specifically Genjutsu, and the times we've seen Sukuna use his Space Slash were both late into his battles. Because of this, I believe Itachi should secure this W via Genjutsu. However, if you believe Sukuna uses the space slash first, I'll hear an argument for that as well. That said, in my opinion, Itachi succeeds in capturing Sukuna via Genjutsu with high difficulty, Kisame on the side not doing a ton of work. 7 to 9 out of 10 difficulty for the monster duo, taking down the king of the curses. But what is a king to a god? The next duo Sukuna faces off against is the god and angel duo, Pain and Konan. Sukuna should have a pretty solid physical advantage across the board, but not to such a degree that he should just murder blitz and one-shot every path, because they do have a type of precog with the shared vision, so even faster characters aren't able to just run one by one and one-tap them physically. But what this boils down to, as it usually does, is abilities. So, let's be honest, Konan isn't doing anything to Sukuna. I mean, she's cool, but she doesn't really have any crazy feats without a massive amount of prep and intel, so there's no real reason to go over her stuff, in my opinion, since she's basically just going to be light support and honestly probably get one-tapped by the flame arrow. In terms of Pain, though, I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining his abilities because they've been covered a billion times, but I will talk about how each of them would fare against Sukuna and his abilities. It is worth noting that the Paths of Pain don't really have great physical durability. I mean, they're pretty resilient because they can take a lot of damage and continue going since, they're not alive. They're just being moved by the transmission of chakra into the chakra rods, but they can be taken down pretty easily. I mean, one of them is basically knocked out by Konohamaru's Rasengan. They get punched and leveled. If Sukuna has a strong enough attack, he'll be able to level any of these with little to no problem. As far as the abilities, the Diva Path's abilities should work just fine, and all can do serious damage if Sukuna is caught with them. Diva also has a solid counter for the projectiles, but should get taken down by Dismantle or Cleave should Sukuna use them. The Animal Path summons got shut down by some kunai, so I have no doubt that Mahoraga and Sukuna could beat them up, or that they could get wiped out instantly by Malevolent Shrine, Cleave, or Dismantle. The Naraka Path isn't really a combat path, but would be super important, especially early on when Sukuna is having to figure out their abilities. The Ashura Path's weapons might be able to do some damage, but I think protecting himself with domain amplification is a solid answer for them, as they're really not all that powerful. The Human Path's Soul Rip is probably not going to work, because Sukuna does have control over his own soul, so since we see Naruto kind of play tug-of-war with Kabuto, who's controlling Nagato during the war arc, whenever he's trying to pull his soul out, I think Sukuna should be able to do something similar and probably win, to be honest. And finally, the Preta Path's Absorption could be super effective against Piercing Blood and the Flame Arrow, and maybe even Malevolent Shrine to some degree if you say that everything in Malevolent Shrine is made up of cursed energy. But here's the deal. Sukuna basically has an answer for everything Pain has to offer aside from the Diva Path's abilities. So it's pretty clear cut here, right? Well, not so fast. Sukuna may be able to beat them in one shot if he starts with his domain expansion. I actually do think that would be a viable win con, but that's not really how he ever starts his fights. And I would argue that if he knew Pain's abilities, he probably would do that, but he has no idea what Pain's abilities are, so he'd have to spend time figuring those out. But because Pain almost always starts his battles by summoning the animal paths, I think that's probably his first move. Sukuna typically likes to wait for the other person to come to him or just engage in a physical clash, so once the animal paths are out, again, because they're not very strong, I do think Sukuna would probably just manhandle them, but he would have to worry about projectiles coming in from the Ashura path and the other paths kind of coming up and trying to attack him as well. So this is where Mahoraga, Sukuna's daddy, comes into play. He'd likely come out and start absolutely dismantling, no pun intended, the Ashura path, as that's the path that usually engages in close-range combat early on, with Sukuna being able to deal with the animal path with relative ease. So, with two paths down, I think this is where we see the Diva path step in and try to deal with Mahoraga. With Sukuna chilling in the back, letting Mahoraga do his dirty work, I think that the Diva path would most likely use a Shinra Tensei on him and try to level him. I do think that this would work the first time, and once he's on the ground, I see the Diva Path probably using the Rinnegan rods to pin him down. Now, once that's done, he will turn his focus back to Sukuna. But then the Diva Path will get absolutely leveled. You see, I believe that Mahoraga would be able to adapt to not only the Rinnegan rods, but also to Shinra Tensei. So, anime only fans, this is a teeny tiny little baby spoiler, but it's not even really like a plot spoiler. It's just, Mahoraga was able to adapt to Blue from Gojo, and so if he's able to adapt to Blue, which is literally space manipulation, I think he should probably be able to adapt to Shinra Tensei as well. So, yeah. That said, the Diva Path gets taken down by Mahoraga, and then, turning to the remaining 3 paths, Mahoraga would walk at them menacingly. Sukuna would be chilling in the back, letting Mahoraga continue to do his dirty work. And it's at this point, Sukuna would get blasted in the side with the full force of a 100-ton rhino. Keeping distance and waiting to revive the fallen paths, the Naraka Path would be doing its job. Sukuna would probably take some damage, but just like Sage Naruto would likely physically overpower the beast and put it down again, only to get blasted by a laser beam from the other side. The Ashura Path would stand there with a smoking cannon arm, as he has now been revived by the Naraka Path as well. Sukuna's arm would also be smoking as it slowly heals from being blasted off, because domain amplification was enough to stop it, but not completely. It's at this point I believe Sukuna would begin floating off the ground. Looking around, Sukuna would eventually find the Diva Path, hands clasped. The Chibaku Tensei would be pulling him upward, along with Mahoraga. Panicking, Sukuna would fire a flame arrow at the Diva Path, and it would approach very quickly, but not faster than the Parade Path would leap in front of it, absorbing the attack. Helpless, the King of Curses would launch a piercing blood and try to weave around the Parade Path, who would still just jump in front and destroy it. And Sukuna would get dragged into the massive satellite, along with the General of Curses, Mahoraga. Once the last boulder was pulled off the ground and up into the moon-like ceiling sphere, Tendo Pain would finally separate his hands, take a deep breath, and say, if he knew our secret, he probably could have won. And that could be the end, but with Sukuna, it's never that easy. The giant satellite sealing him away would shake and begin to crumble, before shattering, unveiling Sukuna's domain, spanning 200 meters bursting out of the rocks. Sukuna would fall to the ground, landing next to Mahoraga, now adapted to Pain's ultimate move. The Animal Path would reverse summon itself, and all of the other paths aside from the Diva Path, away from the battleground. This would pique the Dishonored One's interest, putting him on high alert, excited and ready to face off against such a strong opponent. Nagato's nose would be bleeding inside of the big paper tree that he was in, as he gives his last effort by pouring all of his remaining chakra into the Diva Path. Sukuna would sense the buildup of chakra and disable his domain, opting to cover himself in his domain amplification in preparation for a powerful attack. With nearly every last drop of his remaining chakra, Nagato would launch the chaotic Shinra Tensei. Dust and rubble would fly in all directions, leaving a crater the size of a village in the battleground. As the dust begins to settle, Pain would be breathing heavily, looking around, seeing nothing except debris. And as the dust began to settle, he would collapse down to his knees. As the dust that was launched into the sky begins to fall and settle, we as the audience would see one silhouette, standing on the battlefield. Ryomen Sukuna would walk out of the dust and debris, his body smoking and being repaired with his RCT. He would then come up to a severely fatigued and collapsed Tendo Pain, raise his hand, form a flame arrow, and say, "Stand proud, you're strong," before eviscerating Tendo Pain's body. Sukuna prevents his capture and pushes Nagato to the absolute brink, forcing him to retreat with his remaining paths. I don't think Sukuna would be able to find Nagato's real body, so I think he'd be unable to actually kill him. But Nagato also wouldn't be able to capture him, so the walking natural disaster that is Ryomen Sukuna wins. 10 out of 10 difficulty. So here's the thing. I always keep it 100 with you guys, and I do think it's possible that Sukuna gets sealed away with the Jibaku Tensei, but I think it's equally possible that he either breaks out with his domain expansion or uses his Space Slash to destroy the orb inside before getting sucked into it. So, whichever one you side with, make sure to let me know in the comments, but I think it's 50-50, so I went with the one that seemed more interesting, to be completely honest. But the next one is definitely not 50-50. Now, I guess this could be considered duo, but really, it's like whenever you play COD with somebody who's been playing for 10 years and you haven't picked up the sticks in like 5, and it's just an absolute carry job. That's what's gonna go on here. Now, Sukuna faces down the strongest member of the Akatsuki, Obito Uchiha, and our favorite backstabber, Zetsu. I'm just gonna keep it a buck with you. Obito Genjutsu Kamui GG. Should Sukuna's Space Slash work against Obito? Maybe. I think Obito's passive Kamui might still counter it, honestly, but you could make an argument for the slash working. The big issue is Sukuna isn't using that off rip, but Obito 100% is. In character, both of these guys start with hand-to-hand more times than not, which would just lead to Sukuna slipping right through Obito and getting sucked into the Kamui dimension. I guess you could argue that Sukuna uses domain amplification to try and nullify the Kamui warping, but because it was only able to partially nullify Gojo's blue, I don't see a reason why it would be able to fully nullify Kamui. And even if you argue he's able to nullify it enough to dodge it, which I'm not sure if that's even possible. I mean, Minato had to use teleportation in order to get out of it, so there's that, but Obito's Genjutsu is still a win condition here because it's arguably stronger than Itachi's. I have an entire short on this. I'll put it in the top right if you want to click that, watch it for a minute, then come on back. But essentially, the argument is this. So, Obito was able to put the full 9 tails under Genjutsu using his Sharingan, and it's outright stated in Data Book 3 that nobody since then is able to. Now, that includes Itachi with his Mangekyo Sharingan, because his MS has been shown at that point in time. So, even if you just want to argue that their Genjutsu are on par with one another, his Genjutsu should work. And unlike Itachi, Maharaga popping up wouldn't be able to interrupt him, because he could either phase through Maharaga and warp Sukuna away uninterrupted, or just warp away Maharaga and then finish off the King of Curses as well. That said, Obito wins with very little difficulty. The strongest man in the Akatsuki beats the strongest sorcerer of the Heian era 2 to 3 out of 10 difficulty, holding him under Genjutsu and sealing him away. Well, that is the video, guys. Sukuna does pretty well, losing only to the top tiers in the Akatsuki. I will say, I did take a pretty high-end interpretation of his scaling, so if you take a lower-end interpretation, then he probably loses all of these except for to the Immortal Duo. I do think even with a lower interpretation, he should beat them, but, you know, what did you guys think? Was I spot on? Was I way off the mark? Just make sure to let me know in the comment section below. Also, this is a pretty long video, and I do put my best effort into these, so if you're feeling generous or enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button, as I greatly, greatly appreciate it. And while you're at it, if you want to, feel free to hit that notification bell so you never miss out when new content drops. If you made it this far, though, I just want to say thank you so much. I appreciate you greatly. Love you all, and until next time, have a great